The posting had been up for 11 cycles before Maren Voss even saw it. She found it the way she found most things, sideways, by accident, while looking for something else entirely. She'd been scrolling the interstellar labor exchange for basic maintenance contracts, the kind that paid in certified credits and didn't require you to sign your soul over to a corporate arbitration board. Her search filters were set for janitorial and facilities management, level 4 and below, no Zenobio handling required. The posting should never have appeared. Technically, it fell under the domestic services category, not maintenance. But whoever had written the listing had clearly been exhausted, or panicking, or both, because they'd tagged it under every conceivable category in the ILE database, including 3 that didn't exist yet. The title read, Immediate Placement CHILDCARE Provider for Dual Hatchlings Royal Household VAREK Sovereignty. Compensation, negotiable. Urgency, critical. Below that, in slightly smaller text, previous applicants are advised that this position carries a standard indemnity waiver covering psychological distress, minor physical altercation, property destruction up to Class 7, and localized temporal displacement of up to 18 minutes. Maren read it twice. Then she saved it to her favorites, went back to her maintenance contracts, stared at them for 45 seconds, and applied for the childcare job. She told herself it was the pay. Negotiable always meant high when the posting was marked critical. She told herself it was the experience, 4 years in the deep-level maintenance corridors of the Hegemony Station cluster, which required a certain comfort with confined spaces, hostile environments, and machinery that wanted to kill you. She told herself it was logical, strategic, financially sound. She did not tell herself the truth, which was that she was 31 years old and she had been maintaining other people's stations for a decade, and something in her chest had gone very quiet lately, like a pilot light that wasn't quite out but wasn't quite burning either, and she needed something, anything that felt like it mattered. The interview was conducted via secure comms link with a Verk administrator whose carapace was the deep amber of old shellac, and who introduced himself as Coordinator Riveth. He was courteous in the clipped, efficient way that high-ranking Verk usually were, as though courtesy were a budget item that had to be carefully managed. You understand, Riveth said, that 11 care providers have held this position over the past 9 cycles. I saw the indemnity waiver. 14 of them. Maren did not correct the math. She'd learned early in her career that pointing out a superior's errors was a good way to stop being employed. What happened to them? Riveth's secondary eyes, the small, mobile ones above the main pair, shifted in what Maren had been told indicated discomfort in Verk facial language. The position carries significant challenges. The Queen's hatchlings are spirited. How spirited? The most recent provider required medical extraction from a ventilation shaft. She had entered voluntarily in an attempt to hide. From the children. From the children. Maren thought about the pilot light. Tell me about the hatchlings. The twins were named Save and Rel. They were, by Verk reckoning, approximately 4 cycles old, which translated to somewhere between 6 and 8 years in standard human developmental terms, old enough to be deeply, comprehensively, catastrophically clever, and young enough that they hadn't yet developed the social inhibitions that usually prevented cleverness from becoming catastrophe. They had 4 arms each, a pair of vestigial wing buds that the Queen had insisted Riveth describe as decorative rather than functional. They were not decorative. Maren would learn this on day 2, when Save used the wing buds to generate lateral thrust during a ceiling run and covered the length of the main chamber in approximately 4 seconds. They had translucent amber skin through which their circulatory structures were faintly visible, and the completely unhinged energy of creatures who had been hatched into a universe that had not yet told them no firmly enough. Their mother was Queen Vekara. She was the sovereign of the Verk 6th sovereignty, which controlled 11 star systems and had a military fleet that could reduce a moon to orbital debris in about 4 days. She was formidable, brilliant, and almost entirely absent, which was one of the core structural problems of the situation. Her diplomatic schedule ran 18 hours a day. Her court required her presence for another 3. Whatever remained, if anything remained, belonged to Save and Rel, and it was almost never enough, and the twins knew it, and they processed the knowing the way all children process that particular wound, by becoming more. More noise, more chaos, more impossible, more present, more demanding, more everything, because if you are loud enough and strange enough and difficult enough, maybe someone will finally stop and look at you and keep looking. Marin understood this with a clarity that surprised her. It surprised her because she recognized it from a specific, personal location, from being 12 years old on a station where her parents worked double shifts, and the maintenance tunnels had been the only place where nobody expected anything from her, and the machines at least responded when she paid attention to them. She did not say any of this in the interview. She got the job. The royal residence occupied the top 7 tiers of the Verk Sovereignty Administrative Spire on Carev Station. Marin arrived on a Tuesday by station calendar, dragging a single equipment case and wearing her maintenance coveralls, because she hadn't owned anything more formal since her stint on the Hegemony cluster, and she decided that showing up honest was better than showing up impressive. Coordinator Riveth met her at the entry lock with 3 staff members, whose expressions she could not read, and a manifest of the previous provider's incident reports, which he handed to her on a data chip, with the expression of a man passing on a terminal diagnosis. "I would suggest reviewing these before your first interaction with the hatchlings," he said. "I'll read them after," Marin said. "I don't want other people's fear in my head before I've formed my own impressions." Riveth's secondary eyes shifted again. "That is either very wise or very foolish." "I've been told those are the same thing." The residence itself was extraordinary. Even Marin, who had spent years in the maintenance tunnels of some of the most technically impressive structures in human-controlled space, and had developed the occupational habit of seeing every beautiful thing in terms of its load-bearing specifications and maintenance schedules, felt the breath go slightly out of her when the entry doors opened. The Verk built for permanence. Every surface was either carved stone or cast alloy, and the ceilings ran 40 feet overhead in the main corridors, and the light came from bioluminescent panels that pulsed in patterns synchronized to the Verk circadian rhythm. The whole place smelled faintly of something Marin couldn't identify, sweet and sharp at the same time, like ozone and honeycomb. There were sculptural elements set into the walls every 50 feet, abstract geometric forms that Marin kept catching herself studying, because they seemed to encode structural information as well as aesthetic preference, as though the Verk had never quite separated engineering from art. She was shown to her quarters, which were modest by Verk royal standards and extremely generous by the standards of anyone who had ever lived in a maintenance worker's bunk. There was a proper bed, a work table, a terminal, and a narrow window that looked out over the station's mid-tier, where the commercial districts spread in the organized geometry of a society that planned very carefully. She set her equipment case down, looked at the window for a moment, and then went to look for the hatchlings without unpacking. She heard them before she saw them. There was a sound, a specific, layered, chaotic sound, that Marin recognized from her childhood, from playgrounds and school corridors and family gatherings, where the undertons had been given too much sugar and too little supervision. It was the sound of children who were entirely in charge of their immediate environment and knew it. It was the sound of a very small, very energetic force of nature, doing exactly what it wanted with no meaningful opposition. It had a particular quality that set it apart from pure destruction. There was something purposeful in it, directional, like a current that had found its own path because nobody had built it a channel. The door at the end of the corridor was dented, not damaged exactly, not breached, but dented in the specific way that suggested something had been thrown at it repeatedly from the inside, with great enthusiasm and some degree of accuracy. The dents were evenly distributed across the lower half of the door, roughly at the height that a four-cycle Verk hatchling's four-armed throwing mechanism would naturally produce. Maren studied them for a moment. She noted the pattern. Consistent force, variable angle, they were testing the structural response, seeing if the impacts changed anything. She felt something that might have been admiration. She opened the door. Save was on the ceiling. This was possible because the Verk, in their commitment to building for all life stages, had installed climbing rungs along the upper walls of the hatchling's chamber, intended for exercise and development. Save had repurposed these rungs as launch points for a projectile system they had apparently engineered from 3 pillows, a length of decorative cord, and what appeared to be the remains of their last meal, something dense and round that Maren would later identify as a Verk meal sphere, which when dried and hardened had roughly the mass and trajectory characteristics of a cricket ball. The mechanism was simple, tension release, pull lever, projectile, but the geometry of it showed that someone had thought carefully about angle and force. The dents on the door made sudden complete sense. Rel was on the floor in the middle of a structure that defied easy classification. It was part fort, part machine, part something else entirely. There were furniture pieces in it. There was what appeared to be a section of wall panel that had been removed from somewhere, though Maren could not immediately identify where. There were cords running between elements in patterns that were either random or brilliantly systematic, and Maren had enough engineering in her to suspect the latter. She let her eyes trace the cord paths and found herself arriving at a hypothesis about fluid dynamics modeling before she stopped herself, because she was getting ahead of the evidence. Both of them went absolutely still when she came through the door. The stillness was not the stillness of guilt. She knew guilt stillness, the caught doing something freeze, the eyes cutting to the door, the body language of someone calculating whether to run. This was different. This was the stillness of predators observing new prey, eyes fully forward, weight balanced, assessment running fast behind those amber gazes. Maren held their attention, 4 small eyes to 8, because each of them had the standard Verk 4, and she didn't say anything. She looked around the room with the slow, methodical attention she gave to any new work environment, cataloging, assessing, filing. She took in the projectile launcher on the ceiling. She took in the structure on the floor. She took in the 3 dents in the interior of the door that matched the exterior ones. She looked at the gap in the wall where the panel had come from, located it, measured it with her eyes, and determined it was on the interior partition wall rather than an exterior-facing surface, non-structural as far as she could tell, though she'd want to check the schematics. Then she sat down on the floor, cross-legged in the middle of the room, and she started opening her equipment case. Save dropped from the ceiling. Not all the way down. They caught a rung about 6 feet up and hung there, all 4 arms engaged, head tilted at the angle Maren would come to recognize as active curiosity. The wing buds were partially extended, generating a low, almost subsonic hum that she felt in the back of her throat more than heard. "What is that?" they said, in Verk standard. "Tools," Maren said. "What for?" "Fixing things." She laid out a calibration wrench, a harmonic sensor, a plasma cutter set to low power, and a coil of self-sealing conduit. She arranged them in a line, parallel, with the spacing she always used, and then beside them she added a roll of engineering tape, a structural adhesive pen, and her personal copy of the Verk Standard Facilities Code, which she'd bought 3 years ago and read cover to cover twice, and which now had tabs in 17 places. Rel emerged from the structure on the floor, slowly, cautiously, like a small scientist approaching an experiment that might be interesting or dangerous. They moved with a precision that Maren noted. They were avoiding stepping on certain sections of the floor, following a specific path through the room. She looked down and saw why. There were marks on the floor in a grid pattern, drawn in what appeared to be the same food substance as the meal sphere projectiles, which was a standard Verk Arten notation medium that children used the way human children use chalk. The grid was not random. It was a coordinate system. "You are the new keeper," Rel said. "I'm Marin." She looked up then briefly, made eye contact with Rel, and then looked back at her tools. "You're Rel, that's Save." "How do you know which is which?" Save demanded, dropping another rung closer. Save was on the ceiling. Rel was doing structural engineering. She picked up the harmonic sensor and turned it over in her hands, checking the calibration readout. "You've got different kinds of energy." A silence. Then Save dropped to the floor, landing in the loose kneed way the Verk absorbed impact, and came to stand about 3 feet away, studying her with the direct, uncomfortably thorough attention of a child who had not yet learned that staring was considered rude in most cultures. In Verk culture, Marin would learn, it wasn't considered rude at all. Sustained eye contact was respect, an acknowledgement that the observed person was interesting enough to look at. "The others were afraid of us," Save said. Marin looked up, held the small amber gaze. "Were they mean to you about it?" "No," a pause in which Save appeared to be searching through something internal. "They just left." She looked at Save for a moment, really looked, the wing buds. The precise grip pattern of 4 hands on the ceiling rung. The projectile launcher that was actually, she realized, a fairly sophisticated demonstration of tension-force relationships for a 4-cycle child. She looked at Rel's coordinate grid on the floor, the care of it, the grid lines even and deliberate. "I'm not going to leave," she said. "I'm going to be here every day, and I'm going to be honest with you about when something is dangerous and when something is fine, and I'm going to need your help to understand how things work around here, because I'm new and I don't know everything yet." Rel had moved closer, 3 feet away now, mirroring Save's position. "What things?" "All of it," she gestured at the room. "That structure you built, I want to understand the design logic. And the launcher on the ceiling, I'm curious about the tension ratios." She paused. "But first I want to know where that wall panel came from, because if it was load-bearing, we have a facilities issue." The twins exchanged a look. It was a specific look, fast, flicking, the kind of glance that carries a full conversation in a fraction of a second. Marin had seen it between siblings, between long-term partners, between people who had been through something hard together and developed their own language for it. It lasted less than a second and told her everything she needed to know about the relationship between these two, which was completely synchronized, deeply familiar, the intimacy of people who had always only had each other. Something in her chest did a small, quiet thing. "It was not load-bearing," Rel said. "I checked the structural specifications before removing it." Marin picked up the harmonic sensor and stood up. "Show me," she said. By the end of the first week, 3 things had happened that had never happened before in the history of the hatchlings' care arrangements. The first was that the wall panel had been replaced, not by maintenance staff, but by Marin working alongside Save and Rel. The twins handing her tools in a rotation they developed organically on the second day when they realized there was a rhythm to how she worked, and they could participate in it. Save operated the calibration sensor with a precision that made Marin quietly revise her estimate of their cognitive development upward by about 18 months. Rel held the adhesive seam steady during the setting period with all 4 hands, maintaining exactly the pressure Marin had specified, for exactly as long as she'd asked, without shifting or fidgeting. A display of physical discipline that most adult humans couldn't match. The second was that the structure on the floor had been redesigned, with Marin's input, into something that was functionally a small fluid dynamics model, demonstrating principles that Rel had apparently been working toward intuitively without knowing the formal framework for them. When Marin identified what the structure was trying to do, demonstrate pressure differential across variable width conduits, and gave it the name for it, and got the Werk facilities code, and opened it to the relevant section, and read it aloud, and then put the book down on the floor, and let Rel read the rest of it themselves. Something had happened to Rel's face that Maren didn't have precise vocabulary for. It was the face of someone who had been trying to say something for a very long time in a language they didn't have, and had just been handed the words. The third was that no incident reports had been filed. 0. In 7 days, not a single one. Riveth came to her quarters on the 7th evening with the expression of a man who had been waiting for a catastrophe that hadn't arrived and wasn't sure whether to be relieved or suspicious. "The hatchlings have not attempted to compromise the ventilation system," he said. "They're using it to run a pressure differential experiment," Maren said. "The launcher on the ceiling was part of the data collection. I've been helping them formalize the methodology." Riveth's secondary eyes performed a full lateral sweep, which she'd learned meant profound disorientation. "You are assisting them in their destruction of the residents." "I'm assisting them in what they were already doing, but with better safety protocols and actual scientific rigor." She pulled up her maintenance log and turned the screen toward him. "The projectile launcher has been redesigned so it doesn't dent the door trajectory, adjusted 16 degrees, impact dispersal pad added on the target wall. We're logging all structural modifications with maintenance notation so the station engineers know where to look if there's ever a systems review." Riveth stared at the log. At the modification entries, each one documented in proper facilities language, signed off with a junior technician notation. Maren had designated the twins as junior technicians in the log, which was technically not an authorized classification, but which was also, technically, not wrong. "The Queen," Riveth said carefully, "has asked to be informed of any unusual developments. Tell her I'd like to meet with her when her schedule allows." Maren looked up from the maintenance log she was filling out. "Her children are extraordinary. She should know what kind." The meeting with Queen Vekara happened on day 15. And it happened the way the most important things in Maren's life had always happened. Not scheduled, not ceremonial, but caught in the margins of something else, sideways, unexpected. Maren was in the corridor outside the hatchling's chamber at 6 in the morning, doing a routine check on the ventilation manifold that Save had rerouted the previous afternoon. The modification had improved the airflow distribution significantly, but had in doing so bypassed one of the pressure relief valves in a way that created a subtle but genuine hazard. It wasn't malicious. Save hadn't known about the valve's function. That was a gap in knowledge, not judgment, and it was easily fixed. She was on the floor with the manifold panel open when she heard footsteps, the specific cadence of Werk formal movement, measured, controlled, not the clipped administrative walk she'd learned to recognize as Riveth's, but something longer and more deliberate. She looked up. The Queen came walking down the corridor in full diplomatic regalia, still wearing the ceremonial carapace polish that indicated she'd come directly from a state function. The polished surface caught the bioluminescent light and scattered it in amber patterns. There were stress markers around her secondary eyes, the tightening of the orbital plates that indicated sustained fatigue. And she was moving at the controlled quick step of someone who was tired down to their bones, but was not going to show it. She was headed for the hatchling's chamber door. She stopped when she saw Maren on the floor with her maintenance kit. "You are the human," the Queen said. "It was not a question." "Maren Voss." She got to her feet and did the Werk acknowledgement gesture, fist to sternum, slight bow, which she'd learned from the maintenance crews years ago. "Your hatchlings rerouted this manifold. The work is actually sound, better airflow distribution than the original configuration, but it bypassed one of the pressure relief valves, so I'm adding it back in. I'll have it sealed up in about 10 minutes. The Queen looked at the manifold, at the tools laid out beside it in Maren's habitual parallel arrangement, then at Maren with an assessment that was neither warm nor cold, simply thorough. At 6 in the morning, Vikara said. I do walkthrough at 05:30. Found it last night, didn't want to wake anyone to fix it, came back first thing. You do a nightly walkthrough of the structural systems. Old maintenance habit. Marin picked up the valve fitting. You want to know what's actually going on with the systems you're responsible for, so you check. Another look. Then the Queen moved not away but closer to lean against the corridor wall with the controlled ease of someone who was exhausted but had learned to rest without ever fully stopping. She looked toward the hatchling's door. Coordinator Riveth tells me there have been no incident reports, Vikara said. No, they've been busy. With what? Fluid dynamics, structural load analysis. A study of projectile trajectory that's honestly more sophisticated than anything I've seen at that developmental stage. Marin got the valve fitting seated and started on the seal. They're very smart. You probably know that. But I don't know if you know how specifically smart they are, the kind of smart that turns into engineering if someone hands it the right vocabulary. Rel has been building intuitive models of physical systems since before I arrived. Save has a sense for structural dynamics that I'd hire if it came in adult form. The Queen was quiet for a moment. The previous providers described them as unmanageable. They're not unmanageable. Marin checked the seal pressure. Good. She started replacing the manifold panel. They're bored and they miss you, and they've been expressing that the only way they know how, which is by being as impossible as possible. She glanced up. That's not a criticism. That's just what children do when they need something they're not getting. The silence stretched. Marin kept working. She had learned over a decade of maintenance work that silence was a tool, not a void. You didn't need to fill it. You just needed to let it do its work. The Queen watched her close up the panel and run the diagnostic and check the readout and log the fix in 3 lines of maintenance notation. All of it calm, methodical, unhurried. I have 347 diplomatic obligations in the current cycle, Vikara said. I know. Marin snapped her kit closed. I'm not suggesting you cancel them. I'm suggesting you let me tell you about your children so that when you do have time with them, you know what they've been thinking about. She stood. A summary, 5 minutes a day. You can read it on transit between sessions. The Queen considered it. Marin Voss. She stopped. Why did you take this position? Vikara asked. You are a maintenance engineer. This is not your field. Marin thought about the pilot light. I needed something that mattered, she said. Seemed like a good bet. She went inside. She sent the first summary report that evening. She kept it to 3 sections. What they had built, what it demonstrated about their reasoning process, 1 question each of them was currently working on. She formatted it for speed, direct, unornamented, the way you talk to someone who was smart and busy and didn't have time for padding. She did not know if the Queen read it. She kept sending them anyway. On day 23, the Sovereignty received a diplomatic delegation from the Orathy Collective, which sent the entire upper administrative tier into a state of controlled frenzy. Riveth gave Marin a briefing, carefully worded, stripped of classified detail, conveying primarily that she should keep the hatchlings occupied and away from the formal reception areas for the duration, which was estimated at 4 days. She understood what he wasn't saying. The Orathy were difficult. The political situation was delicate. The Queen needed to be fully present, and the last thing she needed was 2 4-cycle-old hatchlings appearing in the middle of formal negotiations, doing whatever 4-cycle-old Verk hatchlings did when bored and unsupervised, which Marin now knew in considerable detail. She told the twins that they were going to build something. What? Rel asked. I don't know yet, she said. Let's figure it out. This was, she had learned, the correct approach. If you told them what to build, you got compliance and low-grade resentment. If you gave them a problem to solve and then collaborated on the solution, you got a level of focused engagement that could sustain for 6, 8, 12 hours without a single incident. The trick was framing the problem correctly. Big enough to be interesting, constrained enough to be solvable, with enough genuine unknown territory that Marin wasn't just pretending she didn't know the answer. The project they landed on was a working model of the Verk Sovereignty stellar cartography, a physical representation of the 11 systems, with the relative gravitational relationships expressed through weighted suspension points and tension lines. In adult terms, a reasonably sophisticated orrery. In the hands of two four-cycle Verk hatchlings with high engineering aptitude and a human maintenance engineer who knew structural dynamics, it became an obsession. They worked for 2 days. Marin moved a cot into the hatchling's chamber on the first night, because she decided that being inside with them was better than being posted outside like a guard. The twins had no objection. They seemed to find her presence settling in a way they hadn't found anyone's presence before, as though the simple fact of an adult who was there when they fell asleep, and there when they woke up, and did not leave did something structural in them that formal caregiving had not managed. She ate with them Verk food mostly, which she'd been gradually acquiring a tolerance for. She kept some human rations in her kit, nutrient bars, dried fruit, and a small supply of coffee that she allowed herself 1 cup of per morning, and that the twins found fascinating. "What is that smell?" Save asked on the first morning, standing 3 feet from her as she prepared the coffee with the portable heating coil. "Coffee?" She handed over the open packet so they could smell it directly. Save inhaled, flinched back slightly, and then inhaled again in the slow, deliberate way that indicated sensory processing. The wing buds half extended, involuntary, a physiological response to sensory stimulation that they hadn't learned to suppress yet. "It smells like a warning," they said. "That's because it is one," Marin said. "It's a warning that the day is starting." This was apparently philosophically satisfying to a four-cycle Verk hatchling, because Save turned to Rel and said it again, a warning that the day is starting, with the tone of someone who had just acquired a significant piece of wisdom. Rel looked at the cup, at Marin, at Save, and said with the gravity of a scholar formally endorsing a position, "That is correct." Marin drank her coffee. The day started. They worked on the orrery. Save took primary responsibility for the suspension mechanics, the hanging weights, the tension lines, the spatial relationships between systems. Rel took the cartographic data and the mathematics of gravitational interaction. Marin moved between them, providing structural methodology when they needed it, asking questions when she didn't understand their approach, and often being shown something different from what she would have done but correct, and adjusting her own understanding accordingly. On the second day, Rel hit a problem. The second stellar ring, the inner sovereignty systems with the most complex gravitational interactions, kept producing resonance in the physical model when the suspension lines reached the target tension. The whole ring would oscillate with a frequency that threw off everything attached to it. Standard load distribution made it worse. Rel ran the calculations 3 times, showing the work to Marin each time with the precise, repeatable presentation of someone demonstrating rather than just doing, and each time the resonance problem remained. Marin looked at it for a long time. She thought about counterweighting, dampening materials, adjusting the anchor points. None of them felt right. She was about to say so when Rel said, "What if we don't oppose the resonance? What if we accept it and root it?" "Root it where?" "Into the tertiary ring." Rel was already recalculating, hands moving fast across the notation surface. "If we offset the tertiary suspension by this much," they showed Marin the adjustment, "the resonance from the secondary becomes a driving frequency for the tertiary. The energy doesn't disappear. It goes somewhere useful." Marin looked at the math. It was correct. It was better than what she would have done, countertension rather than dead resistance, routing force rather than blocking it. The same principle she'd used when managing vibration in the deep-level maintenance corridors on the hegemony cluster, where fighting structural resonance directly had burned out dampers in weeks, but tuning to it had made systems stable for years. "That's good," she said. She meant it absolutely. Rel looked at her to check if she meant it. Then, "Show me why it works." So she did. She got the structural dynamics reference from her kit, and they spent 2 hours going through the underlying principles, until Rel could explain it formally, in the language of the discipline, and Save had been listening from the ceiling, and had absorbed enough to ask 3 follow-up questions that pushed both of them a layer deeper. By the time the orrery was finished, it was one of the most accurate physical stellar models Marin had ever seen at any scale, built by a maintenance engineer and 2 children who couldn't reach the top shelf. On the 3rd day of the Orathy delegation, something went wrong. She didn't know the specifics at first. She knew it because the residents went quiet in the particular way that large buildings go quiet when the people inside are suddenly very tense and very purposeful. Reveth appeared at the hatchling's chamber door at midday with his secondary eyes in full lateral sweep, and his carapace shell slightly raised, the Verk equivalent of all the hairs on the back of your neck standing up. "There is a situation," he said. "What kind?" He looked at the twins, absorbed in calibrating the tertiary ring's offset, then at Marin with an expression that said, "Not in front of them." She stepped into the corridor. He closed the door most of the way. "The Orathy delegation leader has made a specific and significant request," Reveth said. "He has asked to meet with the royal hatchlings." "Why?" "The Orathy have a cultural practice related to assessing the vitality of a sovereign lineage. When they negotiate with a ruling house, they believe the character of the heirs reflects the character of the governance. If they believe the heirs are strong, the negotiations proceed on favorable terms." He paused. "The last time an Orathy delegation requested an heir assessment and was refused, they withdrew from a treaty that had been 40 years in negotiation." "What does the Queen want to do?" "She has authorized the meeting." Reveth's secondary eyes went still. "She has instructed that you will accompany the hatchlings." Marin looked at him. "Why me specifically?" A pause that lasted long enough to carry meaning. "She said you understand them." Marin breathed once, slowly. She thought about Save on the ceiling on day 1, measuring her. She thought about Rel's countertension solution. She thought about the Queen in the corridor at 6 in the morning, her face briefly, completely unguarded as she looked toward her children's door. "When?" she said. "1 hour." She had 1 hour. She spent the first 15 minutes sitting with the twins and explaining it plainly. There was going to be a meeting, important visitors from the Orathy collective. The visitors were here for the Queen's negotiations and wanted to meet them as part of that process. It mattered for reasons she would explain fully later, but the short version was, what they showed today would affect things that mattered to their mother. "What are they looking for?" Rel asked. "I think they're looking to see if you're real," Marin said. "If you're actually who you are, rather than a performance." "How do we show that?" "You already are that," Marin said. "You just have to not hide it." She spent the next 25 minutes setting the room, not erasing the work, never that. She moved the orrery to the center of the space, where the bioluminescent light hit it best. She kept the fluid dynamics model in the corner, mid-experiment, because that was honest. She organized the notation surfaces so the work on them was visible and legible. She preserved Rel's coordinate grid on the floor, had in fact sealed it with a light fixative weeks ago, because she thought it was worth keeping. She spent the last 20 minutes sitting with the twins, talking about the Orathy, what she knew of their culture, what their language of respect looked like, why the meeting mattered to the sovereignty. Simple, direct, without drama, because they were 4 cycles old and extremely intelligent, and they deserved to be told the truth about things that affected them. "Are you afraid?" Save asked. Marin thought about it. "A little," she said. "Not much, are you?" Save considered with genuine seriousness, the wing buds half extending and retracting. "I don't know," they said. "I have not decided yet." That's a good answer. Why? Because it's true. She looked at both of them. Whatever you actually feel in there is the right answer. Don't decide it in advance. The Orathy delegation leader was named Venorath. He was tall, most Orathy were, with exoskeleton plating in shades of blue-black that shifted iridescent in the light, and four-fingered manipulators that the Orathy used for both fine work and combat. He came with two advisors who stationed themselves at the door with the still, alert posture of people who were officially present as formality and actually present as something else. He did not come with warmth or social lubrication. He came with the focused, assessing attention of someone performing a professional function he had performed many times before. He stopped in the doorway when he saw the room. Marin stood near the center, flanked by the twins, who stood at their full height, not much at 4 cycles, but they held it as though it were considerable with the orrery between them and the visitor. She had thought about where to position herself and had decided. Beside them, slightly behind, visible but not central. This was their meeting. Venorath studied the orrery. He studied the twins. He looked at Marin with the flat, brief attention of someone categorizing what they saw and filing it. Then his eyes went back to the orrery, and something in the set of his exoskeleton changed, subtle, the slight adjustment of the plating around his primary visual organs. He was interested. "These are the Queen's hatchlings," he said in Verk Standard. "We are," Rel said before Marin could respond. Their voice was level and clear, the voice of someone who had been told to be who they were and had decided to take that seriously. "I am Rel. This is Save." "You built this." Venorath moved into the room, circling the orrery with the slow deliberation of a professional assessor. "With assistance," Save said. They looked at Marin with the direct, unambiguous acknowledgement that was one of the things Marin liked most about them. Marin provided the structural methodology. "We provided the cartographic data and the tension calculations." Venorath stopped at the second stellar ring, the countertension solution, where Rel had solved the resonance by routing it rather than opposing it. He could read the physical logic of it. "This ring," he said, "the load distribution is non-standard. Standard distribution creates resonance instability at this scale," Rel said. "The countertension approach eliminates the resonance at the cost of a more complex calibration requirement. We determined the trade-off was favorable." A silence. "How did you arrive at this solution?" he asked, directly to Rel. "I modeled the resonance mathematically first," Rel said. "Then I looked for what the resonance was trying to do rather than how to stop it. It was moving energy. So I asked where the energy could go that would be useful rather than destructive." A pause. Marin showed me the formal framework. The framework matched what I had found, but I found it first. "Yes," Venorath said, "I can see that." He completed his circuit of the orrery. He looked at the fluid dynamics model. He looked at the notation surfaces. He looked at Rel's coordinate grid on the floor. "How old are they?" he asked Marin. 4 cycles, she said. He looked at her for the first time with something other than category assessment. "And you?" 31 years in human reckoning. She held his gaze. "I maintain things. I try to understand what they're actually doing before I touch them." A long pause. Venorath looked at the orrery, then at the twins. Then at the room as a whole. "The Queen chose well," he said. It seemed addressed to the air. "She did," Marin said. The negotiations concluded 3 days later. Marin didn't know the political details, above her clearance and outside her interest. But she knew from the way Ravath moved through the residence afterward, with the decompressed ease of a man who had been holding his breath for a very long time and had finally let it out, that they had gone well. The Queen came to the hatchling's chamber on the evening of the 4th day, not in diplomatic regalia. In the plain functional garment the Verk wore when they were off duty, no carapace polish, no ceremony, her movement quiet in the corridor, the sound of someone moving towards something they had been meaning to get to for a very long time. She stopped in the doorway and looked at the room, at the orrery, at the twins asleep in the sleeping alcoves, finally, exhausted by 3 days of sustained excellence. Their wing buds were fully retracted in sleep, which made them look smaller, younger, the most unguarded version of themselves. Save had one arm hanging over the edge of the alcove in the careless way of someone who had fallen asleep mid-thought. Rel was curled around a notation surface they'd brought to bed, still holding it, some equation they had started and not finished. Marin was at the workbench, updating her maintenance log. She looked up. "They showed him the orrery," she said quietly. "They explained the countertension solution. He asked them to walk him through the methodology. They handled the follow-up questions without looking at me once." She paused. "They were extraordinary." The Queen moved into the room. She went to the sleeping alcoves and stood between them, looking at her children with that unguarded expression she only allowed in corridors at 6 in the morning and apparently in private, in the dark. She stood there for a long time without speaking. "The Orathy leader said to me," Vikara said very quietly, "your heirs do not perform strength, they have it." A silence. "He meant it as the highest possible assessment." "He was right," Marin said. "He said," the Queen paused, "he said the human was the most unusual thing in the room." Marin looked at her maintenance log. "I'll take that." "He meant it as a compliment." The Queen turned from the sleeping alcoves. She looked at Marin with the complete, assessing intelligence of someone who had spent a career navigating situations of extreme political complexity. "What do you need?" she said. Marin looked up. "You have been here for 26 days, Vikara said. "You have filed no complaints, made no requests, submitted only maintenance logs and the summary reports you said you would send. What do you need to continue doing this well?" Marin thought about it. She thought about what the twins needed, which was what she needed too, because the pilot light and the countertension principle were, she suspected, the same thing at different scales. You didn't fight what was already moving. You rooted it towards something that mattered. "More time," she said. "Not for me, for them. They need more time with you specifically. Not necessarily long, an hour in the morning when you can manage it. Consistent, so they know it's going to happen." She paused. "They're not difficult because they're difficult. They're difficult because they've been reaching for something that keeps moving." The Queen looked at the sleeping alcoves for a moment, at Save's trailing arm, at Rel and the unfinished equation. "I have 347. "I know," Marin said. "An hour when you can manage it, not every day, just often enough that they know it's coming." A long silence. Then, "You are a maintenance engineer." "Yes." "You maintain things," the Queen said. "You told me. You try to understand what they're doing before you touch them." "That's right." "Is that what you have been doing here, with them?" Marin thought about day one. About the dented door and the ceiling launch system and the coordinate grid drawn on the floor in Mealsphere food. About the way she had sat down in the middle of it and opened her equipment case instead of issuing instructions. About everything that had followed from that single choice. "Yes," she said. "That's exactly what I've been doing." 3 months in, Reveth stopped having the expression of a man waiting for a disaster. He replaced it with something he probably would have been embarrassed to name, which was something in the general vicinity of relief, and then gradually with something that was just ordinary professional confidence. The expression of a man who had stopped bracing for impact because the impact wasn't coming. 6 months in, the twins' educational portfolio came back from the Verk Sovereignty's Academy Review Board with a notation that said, in the careful language of academic understatement, that the hatchlings demonstrated exceptional aptitude across multiple technical disciplines and would benefit from formalized instruction at the advanced level. Which was the Verk academic establishment's way of saying, these children are extraordinary, and whoever has been working with them has been doing it right. Marin was at the workbench with her morning coffee when she read the response. Save and Rel were on either side of her, Save going through the preliminary calculations for a new experiment involving acoustic resonance in the station's structural framework. Rel annotating a star chart with mathematical notations that Marin understood maybe 60% of and found beautiful regardless. She read the response twice, then she set it down. "What is that?" Rel asked. "The Academy wants you," Marin said. "Formally, officially, they want you in their advanced program." A silence. Then Save said very carefully, "Will you still be here?" Marin looked at the pilot light. It had been burning steadily for 6 months. She was no longer checking it for failure. She checked it the way you maintain a system you trust, out of care rather than fear. "Different capacity, maybe," she said. "When you're in the Academy program, there'll be other people working with you too. But yes, I'll be here." Save went back to their calculations. Rel went back to the star chart. After a while, Rel said, without looking up, "We told the Orathy that you helped us." "I know. We wanted him to know that we didn't do it alone, that you were there." A pause. It seemed important to be accurate. The bioluminescent panels pulsed in their slow, breathing rhythm. From somewhere in the structural framework above them, the ventilation manifold ran in the smooth, continuous register of a system doing exactly what it was supposed to do. Somewhere below them, the sovereignty was running, diplomacy and fleet management and resource allocation, and all the vast, grinding, necessary work of 11 systems held in order. The orrery sat in the center of the room, all 11 systems in tension. The counter-tension solution in the second ring, routing energy through the whole model in the smooth and continuous way of a thing that has been understood rather than fought. "It was accurate," Marin said. "We built the orrery together." "Yes," Rel said, "together." The position had been posted for 11 cycles before Marin found it. 27 providers had held it before her. According to the final count she got out of Riveth on a slow, administrative afternoon when he was feeling forthcoming. "Why do you ask?" he said. "Curiosity," she said. "I wanted to know the shape of the problem." "And now that you know." "The problem wasn't the children," she said. "The problem was that everyone who came before me came prepared for a fight, so they found one." Riveth's secondary eyes performed a moderate lateral sweep, not the full disorientation of the early days, just a considered movement, like someone looking at something from a new angle. "What did you come prepared for?" She thought about the maintenance tunnels, about machinery that wanted to kill you, systems that were just doing what systems did, hostile until you understood them, and then neutral, and then, sometimes, almost cooperative. She thought about the work of going toward a thing rather than away from it, the work of paying attention to what something was actually doing before you decided what it meant, the work of showing up and staying and being honest and not leaving. "Work," she said. "I came prepared to work." She went back to her maintenance log. Outside the hatchling's chamber, the station turned on its axis around a sun that burned in frequencies human eyes could see and Verk eyes could not. And inside, 2 4-cycle Verk children with 4 arms and wing buds and amber skin that showed their blood beneath it bent over their work with the focused, specific intensity of minds that had finally found the thing they'd been reaching for. The orrery sat between them, 11 systems in tension, the energy of one ring feeding the next in the smooth, unbroken circuit of something correctly understood. A human maintenance engineer, 31 years old, originally from a station cluster no one had ever heard of, drank the last of her morning coffee and started the day. The warning had come, the day was starting. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was, by any measure that mattered, exactly the kind of work that lasts.